Airline sudden cancellation of flights disappoints customers. City reports over 4,000 COVID cases for the third day in a row. A look at Chief Executive John Lee's first 100 days in office. Good evening and welcome. The city's budget carrier Hong Kong Express has cancelled most flights between Hong Kong and Japan early next year, claiming it is reviewing flight schedules for 2023. Some passengers complained that's hampered their travel plans, while others couldn't even contact the airline. Don't get too excited in case things don't go as planned. Some Hong Kong Express passengers have been told their flights have been cancelled or rescheduled. A woman surnamed Chan made plans to travel to Nagoya in February next year, but she was recently told to leave Hong Kong a day earlier than scheduled. Chan said she's never had a similar experience and she felt disrespected, adding she is lucky as she can change her hotel bookings. There's another passenger who's set to travel to Japan with 2 companions in January. The 3 flight tickets, which originally cost a combined total of $18,000, have now been cancelled. Hong Kong Express told him that he could delay the flight by 1 day, but would need to pay $11,000 extra. To his surprise, the flight that's claimed to be cancelled is still open for bookings online. Meanwhile, a passenger surnamed Ma said her morning flight to Kaohsiung has been pushed back to the evening. She tried many avenues, including phone, email, and the company website, but still could not contact the airline. The experience left her feeling helpless. Many people turned to the carrier's social media page to express their anger. Responding to media inquiries, Hong Kong Express said it is reviewing its flight schedules in order to give passengers a clearer idea of its flight plans in 2023. It has rescheduled or scrapped some flights from January 15th next year. It's believed some affected customers were arranged to board other flights on the same day, get a refund, or keep the money for future air tickets. Earlier, the carrier announced it will add 400 flights this year, involving 80,000 seats to cope with the relaxation of travel restrictions in Japan. However, for some bookings, it did say the flights are pending approval from civil aviation authorities. Hong Kong logged 4,900 new COVID infections today, of which 4,605 were locally acquired. Compared to the day before, there was an increase of some 500 cases. Today is the third consecutive day that the city's daily COVID caseload stands above the 4,000 mark. 5 residential care homes reported 9 new infections. 31 residents who were identified as close contacts had to undergo quarantine. 3 schools across the territory are required to suspend in-person classes for a week after multiple coronavirus cases were found in those classes. Separately, 13 more patients succumbed to COVID-19, bringing the death toll to 10,002 during the 5th wave of the COVID pandemic. Although Hong Kong reported some imported cases of the new Omicron subvariant, health authorities found patients who caught the new variant had not developed serious illnesses compared to those infected with the BA.5 strain. Tony Ko, Chief Executive of Hospital Authority, said the HA had already geared up its capacity to cope with a possible surge of influenza and COVID cases this winter. Christy Khan reports.
Health authorities earlier reported that some imported cases in Hong Kong involved the newly identified Omicron subvariant BA.2.75. The new variant recently caused a rebound in COVID infections in Singapore. Based on data provided by the Centre for Health Protection, no community cases had been found across territory so far. But Chief Executive of the Hospital Authority Tony Ko said authorities will closely monitor the situation in the city, noting that other new variants are also emerging from different parts of the world.
From overseas experience, as at the recent data available, we noticed that in general, the severity and seriousness of the patients infected with the new subvariant is roughly similar to the conditions of those who have been infected with the variants of BA.5.
He added that more data is needed from local and overseas to learn more about the variants, as it's still at the early stage. Meanwhile, Ko said the government continues to mobilize resources in preparation for the possible surge of COVID and seasonal flu cases this winter.
For example, in the last few months, we have already significantly increased our designated clinic capacity. We have introduced telemedicine. We have prescribed a lot of antiviral drugs for patients who are infected with the disease. We have introduced drug delivery service. We have been having very close collaboration with private hospitals. The government has also operated quite a number of community centers, community isolation facilities, holding centers for elderly.
He reiterated that these measures could further alleviate the pressure on the public health system in Hong Kong. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Speaking to reporters after a radio program today, Secretary for the Innovation, Technology and Industry Sun Dong said the government has no plans to cancel the Leave Home Safe app for the time being, as the app is pivotal to support the government's anti-epidemic policy in the city.
Leave Home Safe has functioned very successfully since it was launched more than 2 years ago. So far, Leave Home Safe with the Red Amber Code system has played a very important role in fighting against the pandemic with precision. We use the Leave Home Safe app system to support the government anti-pandemic policy very successfully. So currently, we have no plan to cancel Leave Home Safe app.
Today marks Chief Executive John Lee's 100th day in office. The CE said he cares about the people and is always ready to address their needs. He added he will discuss attracting talents and businesses to the city in his upcoming policy address. What do people think of John Lee after 100 days in office? This man says, I haven't seen anything that stood out for now, but he does make visits quite often. This woman says, it's been 3 years since the pandemic. Shouldn't we have returned to normalcy by now? On his social media page, John Lee said, looking back, every day has been busy but fruitful, but time does fly. In his first week in office, John Lee set up 4 task forces to step up efforts such as tackling street hygiene. He also pioneered anti-chamber meetings to facilitate exchanges between government officials and lawmakers. Following the accidents involving the mirror concert when a falling screen hit dancers and a deadly crane collapse at a construction site, Lee demanded his team to respond quickly. Within 3 months, John Lee made changes to multiple anti-pandemic measures. That includes ending the flight suspension mechanism, the introduction of health codes, and the scrapping of 7 days of hotel quarantine and replacing it with 3 days of medical surveillance. He also stressed the relaxation of these measures must happen gradually while allowing most activities to resume. The CE said he would never be complacent, adding there will be measures to attract businesses and talent in his upcoming policy address. That's on top of speeding up the construction of flats for the well-being of the people of Hong Kong. 5 members of the pro-democracy group returning valiant were today sentenced to serve time in a training center. This marks the first sentence handed down to minors who violated the national security law. The 7 members of the group earlier pleaded guilty to conspiracy to incite others to subvert state power. That's after they were accused of distributing leaflets and setting up street booths to encourage the idea of subverting state rule. Considering the defendants were from single families and they were convinced that Beijing and the SAR government were authoritarian under the sentiment at the time, the judge did not rule out the notion that they were being immature. The judge adjourned sentencing for the remaining 2 defendants until November. The childcare charity organization Po Leung Kuk has set up an independent review committee to inspect suspected child abuse cases at its children's homes. The city's Labour chief said authorities expected the charity group to be able to submit a thorough and comprehensive report soon. 2 staff workers from the Po Leung Kuk's children's home were arrested for allegedly pushing some toddlers on playmats multiple times. The duo were suspended from duty immediately after the allegations surfaced. In response to the incident, the organization said it has set up a committee to review management of children's homes as well as suggest possible changes to enhance their services. The committee will be led by Melissa Pang, a former president of the Law Society of Hong Kong, with members from sectors including medical and early childhood education. Still ahead on tonight's news. Explosion on a bridge linking Crimean Peninsula with Russia. reactions to winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, and legendary musical singer Sarah Brightman enters Hall of Fame. Welcome back to TVB News. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv's forces have recaptured 776 square kilometers of territory in the east of Ukraine from Russia over the past week alone. Daniel Rell tells us more.
During his nightly video address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed continued success for Kyiv's armed forces in their bid to recapture territory from Russia. Zelensky said his military has recaptured 776 square kilometers of territory in the east of Ukraine and 29 settlements, including 6 in the Luhansk region, which Russia has annexed over the past week. He added that in total, Ukrainian forces have liberated 2,434 square kilometers of land and 96 settlements since the beginning of its counteroffensive. Meanwhile, a series of explosions rocked the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv early today. There were no immediate reports of casualties. Kharkiv Mayor Ihor Terekhov said the blasts were the result of missile strikes in the center of the city. Terekhov stated the explosions led to the outbreaks of fires at one of the city's medical institutions. This comes as the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, reported more trouble at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest in Europe. The body said that external power had again been cut off to one of Zaporizhzhia's shut-down reactors, prompting the use of emergency backup diesel generators to run safety systems. Ukraine's state nuclear company Energoatom blamed the power loss on Russian shelling. Ukraine's environmental protection minister said any accident at the nuclear plant could release 10 times more potentially lethal radiation than the world's worst nuclear disaster at Chernobyl in Ukraine 36 years ago. The city of Zaporizhzhia is located 53 kilometers away from the nuclear plant and remains under Ukrainian control, despite the wider Zaporizhzhia region having been annexed by Russia. Elsewhere, Russian authorities said today that a truck bomb had caused a fire and the collapse of a section of a bridge linking Russia-annexed Crimea with Russia. The 19-kilometer bridge across the Kerch Strait linking the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov is the longest in Europe. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly threatened to strike the bridge following Russia's invasion. Russia's National Anti-Terrorism Committee didn't immediately blame Ukraine for the incident. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
During an EU summit in Prague on Friday, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, underlined the bloc's need for joint gas procurement.
One thing is very clear. There's a broad support that next spring, at the end of the winter, when our storages will be depleted, it is of paramount importance that we have a joint procurement of gas so that we avoid to outbid each other, but that we have a collective bargaining power and that we put that in place.
Still, the EU's 27 member states appeared no closer to agreeing on how or whether to cap gas prices after a full day of talks in Prague. Most EU countries want a cap on gas prices, but have disagreed on the details. Among the proposals put forward for discussion were a cap on all gas and a price ceiling on gas used for power generation specifically or on Russian gas only. President Joe Biden's warning of a nuclear Armageddon was a clear message to the world not to underestimate the dangers posed by Russia. But what do people in the streets of Moscow think about the nuclear threat? This report from NBC.
President Putin ignoring celebrations, working on his 70th birthday today, as President Biden warns the Russian leader's rhetoric may mean a nuclear crisis not seen for 60 years. Saying we have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that Putin is not joking when he talks about the use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. Tonight, the White House is saying there was not any new intelligence that sparked those remarks, but Russians we spoke to today as fearful as anyone at the prospect. Are you scared by the talk of the use of nuclear weapons now?
Well, everyone's scared, of course, but most of the population in Russia doesn't believe it.
I think it's not possible.
You don't believe it?
Yeah.
You don't think it will happen?
I hope.
Today, in an interview with the BBC,
it's dangerous even to speak about it.
President Zelensky said he agrees it could be an Armageddon and risk for the whole planet, adding Russia has already seized the nuclear power plant. This as President Putin's hopes of victory now challenged by Ukraine's advances in the east. And while experts here tell us Russia's nuclear doctrine limits the use of even low-grade nuclear weapons,
we may find in a situation when each side strives to win, but everyone would lose.
and Russia's isolation, evident from our journey into Moscow, 2 long-haul flights, 15 hours travel from Europe, and the tension palpable as soon as I arrived. I just got stopped in immigration for an hour, questioned, they went through my phone. Despite the billboards celebrating military heroes, many Russians are leaving the country to avoid the draft of 300,000 men, while increasing the pressure on President Putin, state TV urging him to stand up to NATO and even to fire his defense minister. Amid those open divisions among President Putin's allies, the Washington Post reported that a member of Putin's inner circle confronted him over Ukraine, citing several people familiar with the matter. President Biden was briefed on that intelligence, saying, "I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp."
Belarusian pro-democracy campaigner Ales Belyatsky shared the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize with human rights groups in Russia and Ukraine. He is the 4th person in the 121-year history of the Nobel Prizes to receive the award while in prison or detention. Nazvi Karim reports.
As many parts of the world hail Ales Belyatsky's Nobel Peace Prize, the jailed Belarusian human rights activist himself may be unaware of the honor bestowed on him. On Friday, the Norwegian Nobel Institute announced that Belyatsky, Russian activist group Memorial, and Ukraine Center for Civil Liberties were joint winners of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. Belyatsky's wife, Natalia Pinchuk, however, said she hoped the message would reach her husband, who was arrested last year on tax evasion charges and awaits trial. He faces up to 12 years in prison. Pinchuk said she cannot know if her husband heard the news of the Nobel Award because he is in prison in a closed cell to which no one has access. She said she sent him a telegram with the news, unsure if he would receive it. Belarusian opposition activists, many in exile, are hoping his award would bring attention to the more than 1,300 political prisoners in the country's jails. The United Nations paid tribute to all 3 winners.
So as we congratulate this year's winners, the Secretary General said, let us pledge to defend the brave defenders of universal values of peace, hope, and dignity.
The other Peace Prize winner, the Russian group Memorial, was founded in 1987 to ensure victims of communist repression would be remembered. Continuing to compile data on human rights abuses, the group was dismantled in December as Russia cracked down on rights activists, media and opposition supporters. Memorial's chairman, Yan Rachinsky, said in Moscow that the achievement was a prize for all, but it was unlikely to change Russian domestic policy. Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov won last year's prize, but in March his news outlet Novaya Gazeta was suspended as Russia curtailed reporting on the war. Residents in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk celebrate the prize for the Center for Civil Liberties, which was founded in 2007 to promote human rights in Ukraine and which has been documenting Russian war crimes. This woman said she was happy for Ukraine and that all Ukrainian citizens wanted peace. Let God save our Ukraine and our protectors. I want peace in the world, she said. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Sarah Brightman, the legendary singer in several popular British musicals, has received the 2,736th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Brightman began her career as a member of the television dance troupe Hot Gossip. She went on to act in London's West End and starred in Cats. She married composer Andrew Lloyd Webber and originated the role of Christine in The Phantom of the Opera. She later divorced Lloyd Webber in 1990. Speaking after receiving her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Brightman said she was honored.
You know, being brought up in a sort of small English rural town to this, the glittering sidewalk of Hollywood and Los Angeles, I'm just sort of a little bit speechless, actually. It took a long time to get here. I've worked very hard, but I never believed this would happen.
That's the news for tonight. Thanks for watching.